for Jeremy Corbyn, and a face and voice that you will all know, Denise Headley, LBC presenter. You can, of course, watch us on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, on the LBC Facebook, YouTube and Twitter feeds.
Call 0345 60 60 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
And welcome to you all. Let's crack on with our first question. It is from Chris in Kingsclear in Hampshire. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Ian. How are you doing?
All right, thank you. What would you like to ask?
Right, straight in. Considering today's published report on child abuse, and specifically with the council and police publicly apologising, does your panel think that that apology is good enough? And if not, what would be good enough? What should happen now?
Andrea, Leadsom, I mean, this is leading all of the news today. It is an incredible report when you think that this was going on over a period of 30 years and no one seemed to do anything about it. I mean, Chris's question, I think, is a really good one. I mean, what should happen now as a result of it?
Yeah, I mean, it is a harrowing story, and there's no doubt there will need to be a really thorough investigation of what went wrong. But I can say that from some of the work I've been doing on babies and giving babies a better start for life, it does all begin with a lack of joined up services. And I think all too often over the years we've heard these terrible stories of abuse where somebody didn't tell someone, they missed an opportunity and so on. And I think it's vital. We've got to get this right.
I interviewed Linda Bellos, who was leader of Lambeth Council for a couple of years in the mid-1980s. She said she had no idea that this was going on, and if she had, she would have tried to do something about it, which a lot of people will say, well, that's all very well, you should have known something about it, and the report criticises not just her, but other, like Ted Knight, if you remember him in the 1980s, he was leader of Lambeth Council, saying that they were too busy fighting political battles with the Thatcher government at the time and maybe took their eye off the ball.
Councils are extraordinarily complicated, and I personally believe that it's the siloed working that is the real problem, particularly where children are concerned. Very often, the very young are not listened to properly, and of course, when they are under 2, they can't advocate for themselves. And so it's vital that in every local authority area there is leadership of the whole service set for children, and that leadership needs to be very much eye on the ball and not doing anything else, in my view.
Denise, if this went on in Lambeth, you can be damn sure that it went on elsewhere. I mean, goodness knows how many children would have been affected over the years. In some places, no doubt it's still going on. When a report comes out like this, everybody is horrified. The relevant people issue hopefully heartfelt apologies. And then we all forget about it, don't we? What should happen now?
Good evening, and good evening to the rest of the panel. I think this comes on the back of so many other reports, because if you remember the Ockenden report in relation to deaths when children were in hospital, and I think what we're finding is that as we go forward, there's always, like you're saying, hand-wringing. Everyone is always retrospective and looking at some of the key issues, but I think I would agree with Andrea on that point in terms of joined-up working. And I think we also have to look at the changes that have been made to safeguarding, because as a consequence of many of these issues, safeguarding has become much more a prominent feature in local authorities' mindsets. It's now it's practiced in many areas of work. So I think it's very sad, and obviously there's lots of trauma, and there is, I think, the potential for some criminal cases, but it's a case of often it's a little bit too much, or it's too late in a kind of way, especially for the person I heard speaking on the radio earlier in your show.
Well, I interviewed Sandra Fearon, who went into one of these homes at the age of 12 in 1962. And I mean, it was very harrowing, 1964, very harrowing listening. And we did talk about this. You wonder what effect this has on someone throughout their lives, because it's not something that you can just shut out when you leave the home, is it? Andrew Fisher, this isn't the first time we've heard about terrible abuse in children's homes. You would hope that this sort of thing doesn't happen now, but how confident can we be?
I mean, it's appalling what obviously happened there. And as you say, this isn't isolated to Lambeth Council. There have been other councils across Britain. Obviously, Jersey was a high-profile case. There's been institutional cases like this within, the Catholic Church, within the BBC around the Jimmy Savile case. This, I think it tells of a political culture, or just a culture within society in which these children and women and young women weren't believed for generations when they came forward with these things, because these things, people did come forward and weren't believed. And that was a culture within the police, within councils, within all kinds of institutions. And a lot of children, and young women suffered terrible sexual abuse, psychological abuse and violence against them. And I think as your previous guest was saying, I think it's probably unlikely, because of the checks we have in place now and the systems we have in place, having learned lessons time and time again from hearing these cases of historical child abuse. But it's so important that those stories are heard, that these reports are issued, that the people who have suffered do get some level of justice. I mean, as you say, there is no level of justice for righting that. The wrongs that were done to them as children can't be righted, and it does affect people. I'm sure we all know people who have had traumatic childhoods in different ways, and it does affect people for the rest of their lives, and there's no getting away from that. But if this is any small consolation that they are believed now, I think it's absolutely worth doing.
Yeah.
Freddie says,
I mean, I think one thing we can maybe feel a bit more hopeful about is a change in culture about how these kind of stories come out. It's a reminder that sort of establishment mentality, the kind of don't rock the boat, easiest not to say something, really lasted until very recently. And we hope, I think we probably should feel that that's different now, and that with whistleblowers being celebrated as opposed to denigrated, and with the kind of culture of standing up to an establishment and revealing its inadequacies now being quite a heroic thing to do, you hope that in the future these things will come to light earlier and it'll be less likely to go on for so long.
Yeah, I mean, critical is prevention. As Andrew says, it's so awful because this went on for so long and people weren't listened to. But actually, better investment and focus on prevention, on making sure that families don't get into a position where children are taken into care and things are disastrous from then on. So it seems to me we actually need to look very carefully at where all of this begins, which is in the perinatal period.
Chris, you asked the question. What's your reaction to this report?
I'm actually really very, very angry, Ian. This actually happened to me. I'm in my early 50s now, and I've had a lifetime of having to deal with this. And whilst I respect your panel, no one is actually saying, apart from one of your panels saying about actual tangible action, there has to be culpability. I mean, I went through talking to child psychologists and I was not believed. There has to be accountability, and just sort of hand-wringing saying, oh, it's terrible and, well, it's better now. It does not. It does not measure the pain and the humiliation you have to live with through this, and there has to be accountability. There has to be tangible action. Somebody has to pay for this. Somebody has to actually be accountable. And just publicly saying sorry and then sweeping under the carpet and we move on isn't good enough. It just does not cut it at all.
I think that's absolutely right. I think one of the problems here, Chris, is that there were apparently 705 people that came forward and gave evidence as victims from the different places in Lambeth. Now, you have to have people able to go to court, willing to go to court to give evidence. You can't try people and convict them if people won't give evidence. And I completely understand how difficult it must be to do that. So, I mean, you would hope that some of the 705 victims would be able to do that. Now, do you think generally, Chris, now that these subjects are aired a lot more openly in public debate, do you think that it means that more people will come forward and be prepared to go to court?
I think these days the amount of abuse that goes on is no different to how it went on beforehand in any decade. I think the ability for people to have it less taboo, for it to be more open to talk about it, and it's maybe slightly easier to report, means that numbers seem to have gone up. But I think it's a cultural thing that's been around for a long time. And it's the same amount of prevalence as it always been. It's just we're better at catching it and reporting it.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for phoning in a really important subject, which I'm sure we'll come back to on the programme. Just to tell you, by the way, before we go to our next question, tomorrow morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast, Boris Johnson will be interviewed by the great man himself. Nick, I'm talking about. Text question from Oliver in Walthamstow. Boris Johnson plans to expand blanket stop and search powers. Is this the right move, Denise Headley?
I wonder why you came to me first.
Because I know you're going to provoke everyone else.
The short answer is no. This is just a charter for criminalising more young black men. So that's what's going to happen with that, because essentially stop and search is hardly ever evidence-led. So, and it doesn't actually result in convictions. I think what this whole crime announcement is a precursor to the type of legislation that we're likely to receive once we are out of the COVID arena, in a sense. So, going forward into 2022, these are going to be the type of policing policies we have. And I think most of the arguments have been rehearsed all day throughout the press. I don't think there is going to be a significant change in terms of community relations with the police. If you increase stop and search, it's not about increasing stop and search. It doesn't lead to reductions in the crimes that you're looking for.
Well, the figures show that it does, though. That's the problem. Despite all the unfairnesses and all the things that we've talked about for years, when you look at when stop and search powers were at their height, knife crime was not as high as it is now, when the number of stops and searches are more or less halved over the years.
The difficulty with stop and search is how it criminalises other communities and the relationship that police need so that you have better community policing. And the question is this activity going to increase that? The short answer is no.
Freddie?
I mean, I think the poll lead has narrowed. The Prime Minister's just come out of his period in isolation. It was on the grid to talk about crime this week. This has all the hallmarks of one of those political announcements, and I think most people will receive it as such. This question about stop and search has been going on for decades, actually, hasn't it? If you remember, it was talked about to do with Rudy Giuliani back in the New York days, and in the beginning everyone thought this was a great policy, and then there some facts about it emerged. The evidence, as far as I've seen, is that it's not going to be the big killer bullet in terms of fixing this problem.
Unfortunate phrase, but we know what you mean.
Thank you for that, yeah. It's part of this little basket of announcements, and probably we're not going to hear that much more about it in the coming weeks. That's my suspicion.
Andrew?
I think, I agree with Denise immensely. I think, this is a cover for a lack of intelligence-led policing. And the reason there isn't the capacity to do that is that there are fewer police officers on the streets. There are 15,000 fewer police than there were in 2010. The previous government of Cameron and Osborne got rid of safer neighbourhoods teams. They got rid of community policing. If you listen to any of the police forces, anything the Police Federation have said in recent times, that's absolutely vital for community engagement. That's a tough thing. Obviously, there are big structural problems with the Met Police. It doesn't represent the community it polices here in London. And that's where a lot of the stop and search happens. You're 9 times as likely to be stopped if you're black than if you're white. I've lived in London just over 20 years and I've never been stopped in London. I've got friends who've been stopped several times. Yeah, well, I'm sure, and anecdotally, we can all give our stories, but the stats don't lie. They are perennially, every year, you are far more likely to be stopped. And most stops and searches aren't about knives. They're about, and very few are intelligence-led, they're about drugs. And white people's use of drugs is exactly the same, or virtually exactly the same as black people's use of drugs, and yet it's young black men who get stopped time and time again. And I just think, this is a lack of structural kind of governance of the police, that this blunt instrument keeps getting used, because it's supposed to reassure people, and actually what it does is divide the community from the police, because you end up stopping and harassing more innocent people than you do people who have committed any crime. And the stats show that again every year. I think it's another element of Boris Johnson's culture wars. He knows this plays to a kind of fearful element of the electorate who are worried about knife crime, as we all are and as we all should be. but this isn't the way to stop it. If you look at successful interventions, look at Glasgow and what they've done there in terms of violence reduction units, that's a much more intelligent way forward.
Graham on a text says, if stop and search saves one life, then it's worth it. Well, is it worth it, Andrea Leadsom, if it ruins community relations where in certain parts, particularly of London, but not just London, this can be all over the country, where there are certain communities who think that they are being targeted, they're being victimised by the police?
Critical to this is saving lives. I mean, we've seen this huge rise in knife crime, and in particular of younger and younger people being stabbed and killed. It's absolutely appalling. So there's no question that, in my view, stop and search does play a part. I absolutely take what Denise says about how it cannot alienate particularly young black men from the police, but I don't think on its own it's sufficient. And I know there have been some really good initiatives around, for example, going into hospitals when young people have already been stabbed and injured in knife battles and gang battles, and talking to them there when they are feeling vulnerable and are afraid, and actually might listen to the fact that carrying a knife makes you more likely to get stabbed, not less likely. And also things like going into schools. I mean, the police have a big role to play in building that reassurance from communities, but I certainly think we can't do nothing. We can't just carry on with this increase in more and more mums who are losing their sons in particular.
What about what Freddie just said about this sort of initiative smacks of just...
No, I don't agree.
Well, I mean, come on, you've got the stop and search, you've got the high-vis chain gangs, I mean, seriously, and a named police officer. Now, everyone would probably like to have a named police officer, but do you think that's actually going to happen?
Yeah, I think these things are absolutely vital. I mean, the fact is that people who are feeling vulnerable on our streets, if they do have a crime committed against them, yes, they would like to have somebody that they could call on. My constituency inbox is full of people saying this, I was burgled, I was mugged, this thing happened to me. I tried to get through to the police and nobody was there, they didn't come out. And this is a real issue, is that lack of communication that Denise points to, actually.
But you get a named police officer, and what's that police officer going to say? Yeah, we can't come and investigate your burglary because we haven't got enough resources. Bye.
Well, as you know, that Prime Minister is committed to 20,000 more police officers. We're already at almost.
Who was it who cut 20,000?
Well,
just remind
me. I'm not going back to 2010. I'm talking about now. There's been an absolutely radical change in policing. It's so much more intelligence-led. There's so much more use of CCTV and automated number plate recognition systems and so on. So actually the capacity of the police to investigate is greater. But I think...
But they don't deserve a pay rise.
No, but you're belittling some of the initiatives.
I'm not... Well, I'm belittling... Well, I am just pointing out that some of these initiatives have been announced before.
Yeah, but
why are they being re-announced?
Because this is a plan that people can hold the government to account over.
Okay.
So it is bringing together a set of measures that will really make a difference.
Andrew, you wanted to come back in?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, well, I kept saying you shake your head, so I assumed that meant you had something to say. But okay, Freddie has. So
I think I just heard Andrea Leadsom say that chain gangs are a good idea. Does that?
No, I said these initiatives create a plan that people can hold the government to account on.
Chain gangs?
I haven't commented on chain gangs.
Are we in favour of that? Are we going to have walk past on the way to Iain's studio, sort of 10 people in a row digging the street? Is that the Conservative vision?
I don't feel that is the front and centre of this set of initiatives. I think what people do want to see is proper policing of our streets. They want to visibly feel safer, and they also want to feel that people who are persistent offenders are actually being punished. So I wouldn't be a fan of high-vis jackets and chain gangs. I think that's a bit kind of 1950s.
Well, we might apparently have another question on chain gangs, so let's not go too far into that right now. We'll have more questions to our panel in a second. It's 8:20.
This is LBC. I'm Nick Ferrari. Tomorrow, join me for an exclusive one-to-one interview with Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Good morning, Nick. I'm here on your show.
Hear what the Prime Minister has to say with me on Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Tomorrow morning from 7 on LBC.
The global
On LBC, let me reintroduce the panel. Andrea Leadsom, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Denise Headley, you all know, my co-presenter on a Thursday evening on LBC. Andrew Fisher, former Director of Strategy for Jeremy Corbyn. And Freddie Sayers, Executive Editor of Unherd.com. What is Unherd.com for those who don't know?
It is an online magazine, unherd.com, and it's got wonderful comment analysis pieces every day.
Long reads, aren't they, generally?
Long reads. We avoid herd mentality. That's
yes,
the idea.
And you avoid sound
Plenty
bites.
of that.
Right, let's see if we can avoid sound bites in the next question. It's Jack in Worcester. Jack, what would you like to ask?
Is the Prime Minister's use of language around chain gangs and community service and high-vis vests appropriate or inappropriate?
Well, we've kind of heard from Andrea and Freddie on that, but we will come back to you. Denise?
I think the announcement by the Prime Minister today are slightly half-baked, in the sense that if we're actually going to address the questions around crime, we need to be looking at the causes of crime, and we need to take a much more multidisciplinary approach. We need to look at questions around domestic violence. We need to look at good neonatal care and early childcare support for parents and families. We need to have a much more structured...
Andrea's nodding.
Yeah, we need to we need to have a much more structured approach when it comes to children who experience violence from other children, as opposed to just having a knee-jerk reaction, which is...
But what about chain gangs?
I mean, what is the point of a chain gang? I think that's just a visible gimmick.
It's punishment, isn't it?
Well, if we're going to be concerned with punishment, we also need to be concerned with people reoffending. Why do people commit crimes? That's something key that I think we need to address.
I'll tell you what, if I committed a crime and I was sent on a chain gang in a high-res vest and told to pick up litter for sort of 8 hours a day for 5 days, that might be a little bit of a deterrent to me to not do it again.
But what happens when you come out and you can't get a job? What happens when you come out and you can't get any housing?
So you think no one should be punished then?
That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making...
No, it's the point I'm making.
Yes,
though.
okay, well, I'm disagreeing with your point. But the point I'm making is that people invariably commit particular types of crimes because also to do with their social conditions. And unless we're going to address the social conditions, let's not forget what austerity did to this country.
So
what
you
it did to
excuse
families.
every criminal because of their background?
I'm saying we cannot have a linear approach to crime, and it shouldn't be about sound bites.
Okay, but how do you punish someone then? If they haven't committed an offence serious enough to send them to prison, we have to have some sort of community punishment, don't we? There has to be something. There has to be some consequence if you do something bad. What should that consequence be?
I'm not quite sure what the consequence should be. I'm a co-presenter having a panel debate. I haven't got all the ideas about what we should be doing, but I don't think it's going to be something, a quick fit, a nice headline that gives us a few sexy clicks on the internet. It needs to be something a bit more long-term, and it needs to be something that has long-term impact on communities. So I don't have the answers, I'm sorry.
This is the kind of banter you can get every Thursday evening at 8
p.m.
o'clock. Now, Andrew Fisher, you wrote Labour's manifesto in 2017, so I'm assuming you do have all the answers.
Well, I think we had some of them. I mean, actually, I also was involved in the 2019 manifesto as well. And in that,
you were. Sorry,
getting rid of short sentences.
Just the 2017 one was the one that went down best, though, wasn't it? I was trying to be kind.
It was. I think the whole campaign went down better in 2017, to be fair. So there probably are other factors in 2019, like Brexit, to be fair. But in 2019, what we did have in terms of criminal justice policy was a policy to end shorter sentences, where you send people away for a very short amount of times for fairly minor crimes, and actually that's far more disruptive than having good community sentencing. So I think good kind of community-based sentencing, the sort of things where you are doing kind of reparative justice within the community, is quite useful. I think the problem with the Prime Minister's announcement today is that it's part of this whole debate that we've had for years in the UK, and is obviously far more prevalent in the US, where every time the issue of crime comes up, we think the solution is harsher penalties, more humiliation, which is what wearing a high-vis jacket and being on a chain gang is about. It's about humiliating people. If that prevented crime, the US would be crime-free, because that has the harshest penalties in the world. It's only in the Western world. It has actual chain gangs still in some states. And it doesn't work. They are far higher levels of crime than we do here in the UK. So I think we have to be not emotional about this, not knee-jerk kind of, into this kind of ever harsher punitive things, because people don't commit crimes with the aim of getting caught. And that's what this whole thing misses. There are lots of crimes, we know it, from very serious crimes like rape to more trivial crimes, that perhaps don't attract a prison sentence ever anyway, where people are not being prosecuted, not being caught, not being identified at all. And the answer is not about harsher penalties, because if you're not catching and identifying the people, then the penalty is irrelevant anyway. So we need to think about the causes of crime. How do we reduce crime? How do we make people feel more part of their community so they don't want to commit crimes, whether that's crimes of violence against their local property or whether it's about other people in their community? We have to think about those sort of things, which are much harder to deal with than just going, I'm going to put people in high-vis jackets.
Okay.
Let me be unpartisan about it. When Tony Blair said, I'm going to get the police to march hooligans to the cash point, I think in about 2004-05 from memory. That again was this kind of silly, unworkable, soundbite type of policy. And actually we just need to have a much more grown-up debate about crime and how to reduce it that actually works, rather than is this sort of ever more punitive approach, which just doesn't work.
Okay, Freddie.
I'm sorry to bring it back to chain gangs, and it's kind of...
What was the question?
It's a weird sign of this Prime Minister's premiership that he says something like that and no one really takes it seriously, but he is the Prime Minister. He went on telly and very deliberately talked about chain gangs. So let's just think for 1 second, would they actually work? Iain, you've said that you think it would be a big disincentive to commit a crime if you had to wear a high-vis jacket and everyone would be laughing at you or pointing at you. I wonder these days, actually, whether that kind of shame would work as a disincentive.
You think people might see it as a sort of reality celebrity type thing?
If I was on the way here past Millbank, there were groups of people in high-vis jackets doing work, I bet you there'd be people taking photos of them and it'd be up on their Instagram channels.
Yeah, maybe. Andrea, very quickly.
Well, I mean, I've said I don't like the thought of chain gangs a la American side.
I don't think they would actually be chained.
No, exactly. That's the point. So it was a turn of phrase. But I do think, I mean, what Denise was saying is exactly right about we do need to look much earlier. Why is it that people go on to commit crime? I mean, the Conservatives did a very good piece of work called The Conveyor Belt to Crime, which was about the problems of family breakdown and poverty and deprivation and poor education and so on. And I think it's absolutely right that we need to look there, but it's also absolutely right that there is punishment. And as you said, Iain, if we're not going to put everyone in prison, and there aren't enough places to do that, then how do you punish people? And fines don't work. I actually think that your caller didn't mention the GPS tagging for persistent burglars, but when you look at the stats there, it's a small number of people who commit most of the burglaries, and actually their GPS tagging could actually be quite an effective deterrent.
I want to go back to Jack in Worcester. What do you make of what you've heard, Jack, and what would your solution be?
Well, I mean, firstly, to everyone on the panel and yourself, I would argue, have any of you actually spent a Sunday or a Saturday looking at what people in community service do? I spent 200 hours in the care of MCT Novo, and I didn't see much rehabilitation. I saw a lot of public shaming, a lot of embarrassment. I saw a lot of guys that were probably mid-20s, couldn't read or write, probably be better off spent under weekend house arrest and given a tutor to actually get an education.
Well, it's a thought. I mean, this is one of those subjects we could spend the whole hour talking about. In some ways, maybe we will in future. But that is an interesting point you make, Jack. Thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to more of your questions for our panel in just a moment. It's 8:32. Simon English has the LBC News headlines.
Lambeth Council says the findings of an independent inquiry into historic child sexual abuse are shameful and it's deeply sorry. The report found employees at the South London Authority treated those in care as if they were worthless. Despite more than 700 people complaining of neglect, only one senior member of staff has ever been disciplined. Cases of coronavirus have fallen for the 7th day running, but Boris Johnson's urging caution, warning we haven't seen the effects of easing restrictions on numbers yet. Team GB is enjoying its best ever start to an Olympic Games. They've bagged 13 medals in Tokyo so far, including bronze in taekwondo, dressage and for the women's gymnastics team this afternoon. And the weather: showers in the west tonight, more persistent rain in the north, a low of 11 degrees. Rain in Scotland tomorrow, otherwise sunshine and showers with thunder possible in central areas, a high of 19.
LBC.
Next on LBC, let me tell you who we've got on the panel in case you've just tuned in. Andrea Leadsom, Freddie Sayers, Denise Headley and Andrew Fisher. And they are gagging to hear what the next question is. One of my favourite callers. No, it's not Sean in concert. It is Keith in Rickmansworth. Hello, Keith.
Very good evening, Ian, and good evening to the panel. Very good wishes to them. Does the panel agree with me that unless Keir Starmer makes a peaceful accommodation with the Corbynite left in the Labour Party, he has absolutely no chance of overhauling Boris Johnson at the next general election?
Well, I'm going to be very predictable and go to Andrew Fisher.
I think he needs to focus on taking on the Tories, not attacking his own party. I think that thesis of that's a way to get elected was tested to destruction by Neil Kinnock in the 1980s, and it didn't work. So I think the other thing for Keir Starmer as well, more seriously perhaps, or less glibly, is that he stood for leader on the basis of unity within the party. He stood on the basis of a kind of 10-point policy programme, which was a kind of mildly at best diluted version of a kind of Jeremy Corbyn platform summarised. And he hasn't really stuck to it. We haven't seen hide nor hair of it since. And I think that's the biggest problem for him, is that people don't know where he stands on things. And I think that's coming across in the country too. He's sat on the fence on a few issues. So, look, I think, I'll be the first to admit we got a lot wrong when we were, in the Labour leadership. But, to be fair, we've lost the last 4 elections. Labour keeps getting things wrong, and that's been consistent across different factions within the party for a while. There's a much bigger issue to raise here. I think Labour can win the next election. I don't think Boris Johnson is undefeatable. I think the last few days and weeks have proved that there is a vulnerability within the Conservative vote and within the Conservative Party. There are big splits politically, I think, as well. But it does mean unifying the Labour Party, and actually Keir Starmer's been incredibly bad, I'm afraid to say, at doing that. And I was somebody who was prepared to give him a chance at the beginning. I respected the fact he won by a very large amount within the Labour Party, and he won that, as I say at the beginning, for those reasons, is that he promised kind of unity, a kind of slightly watered down Corbyn policy platform, and electability. And I think the jury's at least at best out on one of those, and we haven't really seen much evidence of the other two.
What could he do to offer something to the left of the Labour Party? Bring John McDonnell back?
I think there are a lot of people, who are sat on the back benches who are some of Labour's most articulate spokespeople. I would, yes, include John McDonnell among them, but you could also, talk about Dawn Butler. You could talk about Yvette Cooper on the other wing of the party, or Stella Creasy, to be honest. So I'm not trying to make a factional point of this. If you're Keir Starmer and you want to do a kind of broad church unity project, there's lots of people you could bring in and involve. I think it's also about the policies and being slightly bolder. I think that's what a lot of people liked in Jeremy Corbyn, and in 2017, obviously, that was the only time this century, actually, that Labour's won seats at a general election. That is what it was. It's that clarity and boldness that I think can win people over. And if you look at the polling, people are very much in favour of redistributive taxation. They're very much in favour of public ownership of certain core industries and former publicly owned utilities. They're very much in favour of ending austerity and putting more money into public services, of not giving our police and public sector workers a real terms pay cut or a pay freeze. So these things are popular. I just think there needs to be a bit more boldness, a bit more clarity, and stop looking internally.
Freddie Sayers, what's your advice to Keir Starmer?
Well, it looks like his calculation has been since the start, if you don't really say anything interesting and you look sensible, you'll sort of win by default over Boris Johnson as people become fed up with his slightly clownish act. Well, that has not worked. So I've got to say I disagree with the call. I don't think unity within the Labour Party anyone really cares about outside Westminster. They need to see Keir Starmer do something. In my view, the big open goal since the pandemic is liberal ideals. We've got everything from tagging criminals right through to vaccine passports. We've got all sorts of new innovations that are on the illiberal side. I think that would be an interesting direction for Keir Starmer to go. There's no sign of him doing it at the moment, but for him to say, hold on, we have a proud history in this party of caring about civil liberties, caring about due process, respecting institutions, and we're going to stick up for that. I think he might win some votes with that.
Andrea, would you like to give Keir Starmer some advice?
Yeah, I think he should stand aside in favour of Lisa Nandy, for example. She would have been my pick for leader of the Labour Party. I mean, I do agree with Keith that Keir Starmer is in some trouble, and I actually think that Jeremy Corbyn has a lot for the Labour Party to be angry about, because he allowed the very hard left membership to return to the Labour Party that Tony Blair had largely got rid of during his very successful period as Prime Minister. So I think Keir Starmer is in a very difficult position. As Freddie says, he's not got the personal charisma to be able to carry his party. As Andrew says, he's leaving some of his great speakers and most articulate salespeople for the Labour Party on the back benches. Why? And at the same time, he's doing nothing about the membership. So, I don't see a way forward for him. Sorry, that's not terribly helpful, is it?
It's entirely up to you.
On the other hand, I must say I do think that a healthy opposition is incredibly important for our democracy. So I'm kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek there, because we do need good scrutiny, good strong opposition. And I think we saw in the hung parliament what happens when you don't have a strong government and a strong opposition. And at the moment we have a strong government and a weak opposition, and that's not good either.
Most politicians who support a governing party always say that in interviews, and when they walk out the door they say, of course I didn't mean a word of that, of course we want a weak opposition.
No, as I say, bring in Lisa and Andy.
Denise Headley, you have a background in the Labour Party many years ago. How do you view the current situation, and what do you think of what Keith suggests, that Keir Starmer needs to make peace with the left?
I think it's an interesting question from Keith, and I think in terms of how we look at it, I think we need to look a little bit at context. It's very difficult for Labour to win in this country. Okay, the bar is way higher than it ever is for the Conservative Party.
Well, you mean they have to get more votes?
Un momento, Mr. Dale. I think the point I'm trying to make is that the bar is always higher for Labour to reach, because this country is conservative with a small c. So every conversation that we have is going to be viewed through that prism. In addition to that, I don't think Keir Starmer is, like Andrea said, a particularly charismatic and entertaining politician. But the question is, do you actually need a entertainer to run the country? I think you tend to need something else. You need something that's a little bit more stable, as opposed to just the Yabu effect and great sound bites. And I think that's one of the things that Keir Starmer does offer. He doesn't often get a particularly good press. I honestly believe that. I believe there is a consistent campaign to destabilise the Labour Party through regular, bad press that they get on the same all the time. So they're not getting a good hearing. So I think it's very difficult for him, to cut through. And because Boris is this, he's a bit more of this, enter stage left, we have Mr. Boris Johnson, that tends to get more of the headlines. And I think he needs to play the long game, because at the end of the day, it's like with football. If you can destabilise your opposition by being a really good passer, they always have to react. And I think that's what's happening with Labour. They always are reacting. They need to be proactive. They need to be bold. And don't be scared. Look, if you're going to get kicked 4 years from now, get kicked and do it in a way that people are like saying, you did this, you did that. Don't just wait around. So they need to have a little bit of chutzpah about them.
But you have to kick back sometimes, don't you? That's the thing. I was interviewing a shadow minister earlier, Holly Lynch, about the government, what we've been talking about this crime initiative. And it was like getting blood out of a stone to get her to take a position. It was on the one hand this and on the one hand that. I said, had I had longer, I would have really probably gone for a bit more, because I thought, you surely got to be able to tell me whether you agree that these extra stop and search powers are a good thing.
I think people are afraid, though, Ian. I think the part of the difficulty that Labour is experiencing is they are afraid. If they say one thing, they're going to get a very poor hearing. So I think they're trying to just be bland, and bland doesn't win you votes. You can say what you like about Jeremy Corbyn, but he energised people. Whether you liked his politics or not, people got behind him. He was being worn on T-shirts. He got people's imagination going. So that is the kind of thing maybe that Keir Starmer has to do. And if he doesn't have the capacity to bring that kind of fizz, then get some cohorts and let them bring the fizz.
Okay. Keith, who do you think can bring the fizz back to Labour?
Well, I think Dawn Butler would be a very good one. I noticed that when she was chucked out of the House of Commons on a point of principle, that there was no defence from the right wing in the Parliamentary Party, particularly from Keir Starmer. He made no defence of her, and I thought it was a very brave thing that she did. She'd make a very good leader.
OK. Keith, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a question next after the break, which we tried to take last night but ran out of time. I'm going to give you all a bit of a heads up on it. It's about dog theft. 8:46.
LBC. I'm Nick Ferrari. Tomorrow, join me for an exclusive one-to-one interview with Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Good morning, Nick. I'm here on your show.
Find out what the Prime Minister's plans are for tackling crime, improving policing, and avoiding more COVID restrictions this winter when I sit down for an exclusive interview with me on Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Tomorrow morning from 7 on LBC. Business.
And don't forget, if you miss an episode of Cross Question, the podcast is always there for you about an hour after the programme finishes. And of course, you can catch up on the LBC YouTube channel or Global Player as well. Tomorrow on the panel, we have Andrea Jenkins, a Conservative MP, John O'Connell from the Taxpayers Alliance, social commentator Maurice MacLeod, and the Deputy Leader of the Green Party, Amelia Womack. Now, our next question comes from David in Sheffield. Hello, David.
Hello. Well, thank you for having me on.
Not at all.
Right, my question is it about time that the government and, to a lesser degree, the police have got their hands tied really by the government, took dog theft a little bit more seriously? To a lot of people out there, and it's certainly prevalent where I live, people are terrified to even walk their dog. They're going out in pairs, they're all buying alarms. They're terrified because vans are driving up behind them. Guys are getting out and stealing the dog, and basically the government just don't see it as any more of a loss than a mobile. Now, to a lot of people, loss of a dog is like loss of a child and loss of a family.
Well, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has a dog. Personally, I would reintroduce capital punishment for dog theft, but that might go a little bit far for some of our panel. I don't know if you're all doggy people or cat people. Denise, have you got a dog?
No, I have got fish and I've got cats.
Fish theft?
Yeah. My mum has got a dog though, but I do understand what Dave is saying in relation to the relationship between a dog and their owner. And I think there could be some consideration to make the laws more stringent when it comes to pets, because I think sometimes, especially if you're a mature person, you know, your pet is almost like sometimes the purpose of your being. And if you lose that, you can be very devastating. So I think that David does have a point about making the law a little bit more stricter.
I wonder if any of us actually know what the punishment is for dog theft. I couldn't tell you. Does anyone know? I don't think... No.
Well, this has come a bit stage left, but there has been legislation recently, certainly on animal welfare, but I think also increasing sentences for animal theft. And it's been discussed a lot in Parliament just in recent months. And I think there's a big groundswell of opinion that it should be much stricter punishment.
Andrew, do you have a dog?
I don't. I have a cat, I'm afraid. I'm very sympathetic to people with dogs who have them stolen, though, of course. I saw Cross Question last night because this is my debut on your show, so I thought I'd better watch it and have it fresh in my mind. So
I'm glad you still decided to come on.
Well, I just caught a bit of Dave's question at the end where you cut him off, but did mention it was about dog theft. So I did a bit of research, actually. And, there were 200 cases a month in England and Wales of dog theft last year in 2020. So it's a phenomenal problem. And only 2% of those result in any criminal conviction. So, and presumably the dog then being reunited with its owner potentially, I suppose. But I completely agree with what Dave said. It is, your pets, certainly cats and dogs anyway, are like family members. They are, I've got children, so I wouldn't quite put them on that level, but I do.
I would.
They are part of that. Well, you haven't met my children; they're lovely, So
you haven't met my dogs.
But in all seriousness, I think the problem is, again, it's it's a problem of resourcing for the police again, and prioritisation. I personally, if we're going to talk about prioritisation, I think we have to bite the bullet and probably either decriminalise or legalise possession of drugs, because that takes up a hell of a lot of police time. Most drugs, certainly Class B and Class C, are less dangerous than alcohol. That's been legal for over 100 years. And I think, actually it's been legal forever in this country, hasn't it? Despite the efforts of the temperance movement 100 years ago. But, I do think a lot of police time is wasted with policing minor kind of drugs crimes. I'm not talking about kind of people killing each other over it. That's a different matter. But actually, if you decriminalise it, you take it out of the criminal element, you legalise it and you regulate it.
I don't know how we've got onto drug legalisation.
Well, you have to be lateral thinking, Ian. You have to be lateral thinking. If you're going to allow police to deal with dog crime, you have to free up time from somewhere else.
Robbie, my producer, has found out that the maximum sentence for dog theft is 7 years, but that was under the Theft Act of 1968. Now, Freddie says, my dogs Dude and Bubba are listening to your answer, so be very careful.
Well, I think clearly it's terrible if that happens to dog owners, and it should be properly punished. But maybe there is a solution. We talked about the dangers of overly tracking members of the public, vaccine passports, the constant sense that we're being monitored in more and more ways. And I'm deeply uneasy about that. But I've got to say my civil liberties concerns do not extend to the canine world. And surely to put a GPS tracker on every dog in the land must be an achievable project. Let's make that the target. And then if someone steals it, you can follow it and go and get it back.
Well, they are microchipped. I mean, the law is now that if you get a dog, you have to have it microchipped. And I think that the take-up of that is quite high, but obviously not everyone will have done so. So that there is that. I'm told by Robbie that it was actually Andy MacDonald, the Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights, who's on our programme after 9 o'clock, that informed him of that. So there you have a very well-informed MP, which bodes well for our 9 o'clock hour. David, what would you like the sentence to be or the punishment to be?
I think it's more of if a child was stolen, abducted, kidnapped, we'd be talking a lot of jail time. And I personally think for a lot of people, and they've mentioned older people whose life is centred around their dog. It needs to be geared towards something like that. I'll say one thing. During the lockdown, it was prevalent in the north and probably in a lot of working class areas. And we felt on our own, we felt nobody cared. Now, if the Labour Party seriously want to reconnect with the working class people, this is the kind of thing they want to be getting involved with, because they can storm up against the Tories, because the Tories are not that into animal welfare. Now, Labour can get...
What? That's
sorry.
Andrea is bristling.
Yeah, well,
No, I
she's
think-
wrong. Your government allows stag hunting, and stag hunting is disgraceful. You allow fox hunting, and that's disgraceful.
No, that's not. Fox hunting isn't allowed, actually. But the Conservatives have been very strong on animal welfare. Seriously, extraordinarily strong. One of the first things we've done since leaving the EU is banning the live export of animals, which was an appalling thing that really damaged animal welfare. We've really done a lot to improve animal welfare in the last 10 years.
No, I differ. I mean, if you ban stag hunting, I'll agree with you on that. But I think it needs to be... I'd give them 10 years. It's destroying people's lives, stealing somebody's dog.
OK. David, good question. Thank you very much. Stephen on the Isle of Dogs says, why is it not called dog abduction rather than dog theft? Now, that's a good question, isn't it? But maybe we haven't got really time to go into that. Have we got time to go to Anthony and Staines? Yeah, why not? Go on, Anthony. What's your question?
Hi, is Britain heading from bust to boom?
That's a short question. Let's have some relatively short answers on this. Andrew Fisher.
No, or at least it's a very split economy. There are a lot of people that are coming out of this pandemic without a job. A lot of people in work who are having to rely on universal credit and need that £20 to remain. And there's a lot of renters who are in massive amounts of debt coming out of this, and the government's not coming forward with a solution. So for a lot of people, there's no boom time at the moment.
If you look at the IMF report today, it says that we're going to be growing faster than any other G7 countries, 7% next year, second best the following year. So that would indicate that the good times are ahead, surely.
Well, that's wonderful. Then we can keep the £20 extra on universal credit in September. We can give police a pay rise. We can give nurses a decent pay rise. We've got the money then. So there's no argument for the government there. Good.
Freddie?
Starting from a low base, isn't it? We've also gone down more than most of those G7 countries over the past few years. I think, sadly, what we're going to see is a very divided picture, and actually the divided society we went into the pandemic with is going to become even more so, because for some people it's been incredibly hard and it's been a very difficult time, and that will carry on for maybe even years to come. And for a whole chunk of society, it's been the good times. People who had shares have just made more and more money. There are people who have lots of money in savings accounts now that they're just ready to go out and splurge. So my suspicion is, yes, we will see those GDP rises, but it's not going to mean that everyone in society is going to be getting richer.
Andrea?
I think that's very depressing, Freddie. I don't think that you're right. I think that the caller is correct to say that we'll be going from bust to boom, because we've had a major setback with the COVID pandemic, and the Chancellor has made some excellent decisions about protecting jobs and livelihoods. We've seen thousands, millions of jobs saved by furlough, and now what we're seeing is people getting back to work. We're seeing this huge raft of UK technology, science, the green economy growing, whether it's from electric vehicles to solar panels. There is so much potential out there. Just today I was at a digital manufacturing centre seeing the future for manufacturing here in the UK. We're seeing electric car firms growing and expanding the workforce in the north of England, and we haven't seen the huge unemployment that we expected to see. So yeah, I feel very optimistic.
OK, Denise?
I don't feel particularly optimistic. I think what you're going to experience is that the people who are on the poorest levels of income, that is going to become greater and greater entrenched. And I think they're going to be the people who are not likely to experience any boom. So those people who've been able to see their price, the price of their houses go up and the shares go up, that's not going to be translated to people on 0-hour contracts.
Anthony, thank you for that question. Quick final text question from Angela in Nottingham. Tesco are offering £1,000 for lorry drivers to tackle staff shortages. What job would you need at least £1,000 to do? And keep it clean, please. Freddie?
MP. Wouldn't go there.
No. For £1,000? No, I think you need a lot more than that.
I'd need $1 million. Actually, I'm not even sure that would do it.
Andrea?
Sorry, Andrea.
Oh, I'm going to say a barista.
Okay.
Disgruntled customers. Depressing.
Denise?
Like me.
I'm not sure. I just drew a complete blank. I'm not really sure what to do, so I can't give that an answer. Sorry.
LBC presenter?
Yes, please.
Andrew Fisher?
I mean, I don't know, £1,000 over what time period? Because that's not a very good wage.
£1,000 Brucey bonus to just take on a job.
Oh, I think most of the moment I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing at the moment.
What are you doing at the moment?
Freelancing, and it's very liberating. I get to have a much better work-life balance, and I'm just about scraping by. But £1,000 would come in handy. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Cindy says, Denise is the shining star of tonight's panel. Do you have a fan, Denise?
Oh, thank you, Cindy. Come back on Thursday.
Right, thank you to all four of you. Andrea Leadsom, Denise Headley, Andrew Fisher and Freddie Sayers. Join us again on Cross Question tomorrow night at 8. Coming up in a moment, we're going to be joined by the Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights and Protection, Andy MacDonald. Labour are conducting a week-long campaign on employment rights. He's going to take your calls in just a moment. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Lambeth Council says it's deeply sorry about a string of historic child sexual offences